My grandmother gave me many good pieces of advice, but one of them was to never be the man standing between a mob and its booze. So I'm going to be as quick as I possibly can here. What's our job? Our job is we need to imagine and design new models of one planet prosperity which can work for every person on the Earth, and we need to do it really quickly. What do? We cover new models, new ideas, new tools. We have a blog, we have an online magazine, we have a book. Enough's been said about that. But what it really comes down to is this: we have an unprecedented opportunity, because while the challenges are gigantic, the moment is here. The debate about climate change, the debate about the environmental crisis is over. You're either on board or you're just wrong. And, it's time to do things differently. Some people haven't quite gotten it yet. Me and my Ford are doing something good for the planet, this ad reads. But by and large, this is the moment. Wind power, hybrid cars, green tech has become iconic. Green tech has taken a life of its own, and we're just beginning to see what we could do. There's no reason, for instance, why our windmills need to sit on the ground. This is an aerial windmill. It floats in the sky and makes power. We're also seeing that buildings could be radically different than they are. Here's the Beddington Zero Energy Development, BedZed. I was just here about 2 weeks ago, and this place is amazing. It's really, really cool, and it uses no outside energy. It's water saving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A bright, green, and livable future is really already here, at least in prototype. We're beginning to see how we can do things like not only green our roofs, but our buildings, and even our whole vision of what life could be like. We're starting to see that there are whole ways of expanding our definition of what sustainability is and could be that we never had even thought of before. The best material environmentally that exists is the material that doesn't exist. The material that goes away, that we never used because we didn't need to use it to get the thing we wanted. When we order a movie from Netflix, which I do more frequently than I ought to probably, but we've dematerialized not only driving to the store and back, and then to the store and back to drop the movie off afterwards, but the store itself. All of that stuff just goes away. We don't need to use it. The mailman's already coming to the house, and he's dropping the movie off. Netflix is a really brilliant little example of what a dematerialized future could look like. Cities, though we don't think about it very often, are also tools for dematerialization. Instead of having a bunch of roads going out to a bunch of suburbs, we all share the same roads. Instead of having to get in the car every time you want to go somewhere, you can walk down to the corner store. Cities are also a main tool for fighting climate change. And we're getting better and better tools for making cities and spaces lively and more opportune for doing things. Precision and proximity work together. Many things are really only garbage when you don't know where they are and they wind up in the wrong place. This is an example of junk tagging, which is when you apply precision to trash and you change it from something no one wants to something somebody wants. This is a humorous example from the site Garbage Scout, which tells you that there's a pair of underpants sitting on the corner at 197 Bedford in case you want them. But there are other examples that exist. There are examples for industrial waste, household goods. It goes on and on. And one of the things that happens when you start to have connectivity, precision, and proximity is it gets easy to share things. The best example I know of is car sharing, which 10 years ago was something that only sort of freaky hippie people talked about, and is now an explosive business model. And what made it different? Well, suddenly you have technologies that actually enable the sharing. So you can call up on your cell phone, right? And you can order a car. You can go figure out exactly where it is, get a map, download it, go there, use a swipe card, get in, and drive away. Right? You don't have to book months ahead of time. And what happens when you car share is that you actually dematerialize cars. Studies show that when you that on average, every car that is put into a car share service, every car that is shared, means that 6 other cars go away. Right? So you're still getting the same service. You're still driving when you want to drive, right? But you're not having to buy the same products. Those cars and all the energy it took to make them, all the energy it would take to get rid of them, all the pollution that would be created in the process, those things all just vaporize into thin air because we've got a better technology that gets you what you want without having to destroy the planet in the process. You know, these negacars are a big deal. But also, when you start thinking about things in terms of sharing, you actually change your behaviors. Studies have shown that people who use car sharing services actually are more efficient drivers. They get more done on each trip. They save energy doing the same things even when they're driving. This is a life-size Hummer built out of styrofoam to celebrate the millionth gallon of gas saved by the members of City Car Share. But you know, it's not just cars. You know, everything can be shared. There are millions and millions of power drills sitting unused and dusty on the shelves of American homes. And every one of those power drills represents, in some fundamental way, a defeat. Like, we've made something we aren't using at great ecological cost. What we really, really want is the hole, not the drill. You know? The challenge is that borrowing a tool from a tool library is easy, but getting people to think that borrowing a tool from a tool library is cool is very hard, right? We still have status and identity wrapped up in objects, right? We still think, for example, that, you know, I won't be as manly if I don't own power tools and, you know, drag them out once every 10 years. And we really need to kind of move to a new model where we think about ourselves as being what we do and not being what we own. And I think that that is, in fact, on its way. And the model of sharing products, of product-service systems, just to use one example of ways we could think differently, people have literally identified scores of ways in which we could dematerialize physical objects and share the services they provide. This is a vast, untapped field. And we're getting better and better at thinking through ways in which we might do this and have it work out. How do you deal with the idea of somebody abusing the shared good? Well, there are reputation capital systems, and you know, we can punish bad actors, right? Once you have a user mentality, it changes our relationship to all the objects around us, right? When you get on an airplane and you use that little pillow, you don't think, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I finally have an airplane pillow, right? You use it, you give it back, I don't know what happens to it, but it goes somewhere else, right? We do think that, though, about the pillow that our grandma, like, embroidered, right? So clearly, we already think about some objects as just purely services-made material. Why can't we think of other things, like dishwashers and copiers, that way? Well, we can. And when you do think that way, it suddenly becomes somebody else's job to take the airplane pillow back, right? Whether the airplane pillow is a washing machine or a pillow itself. And you suddenly get producer responsibility. Once you have producer responsibility, people start making things differently. Because if it's my job to take back the cell phone, you better believe that I'm going to start thinking about how you disassemble it and use its constituent parts and so forth. So you have, for example, a pop-apart mobile phone designed to disassemble itself when you put it in, you know, like I don't remember the number, but say a 350-degree oven, something you're not going to encounter every day, but when you put it in there, it just pops apart into its parts, can be sorted out, reused, recycled, et cetera, right? And better design brings environmental savings. It just does. The better you design things, the more you share them, the more responsibly you think about their end state and think through their life cycle, the less and less and less footprint they have. And that's ultimately our goal, right, is to shrink our ecological footprint so that we're getting the same or even a better quality of life without destroying the planet. And one of the ways that we can do that is by measuring things. What we measure changes the way we act. It has been found that simply bringing energy meters into the house makes us use less energy. Forget insulation, forget everything else. You can save, like, I think it's an average of 10 to 12% of your household energy simply by putting your energy meter somewhere where you see it more frequently. You know? The same thing's true of car manufacturers. There's been some folks who've released models of cars that are almost exactly the same, but one has a mile per gallon measurement. You know, it can tell you what kind of mileage you're getting, and the other doesn't. And the ones with these, with no other changes at all, right, get better mileage. Like, people actually do better, they drive more effectively, right? And I think that this is going to become a critical component of how we act. Because let's face it, none of us in this room, none of us in this country, none of us in this planet want to be making things worse. But we do want to live well, right? And I think that if you want guilt-free affluence, which is, I believe, what we're all fundamentally after, right? You need to know the backstory of your material life. You need to know where things came from, where they're headed, you know, all the stuff that happens off stage. And that means that we're going to start, I would be very surprised if we don't have something like a personalized ecological footprint being a status item within 5 years. I think we're going to want to know and to be able to show others that we're doing the right thing. And it's spreading all over. I mean, look at what's happened with sweatshop labor. 10 years ago, this was a fringe issue. Now you're seeing ads like this in mainstream papers. You know, I mean, it's hot. Look at what's happening to people who don't get it. You know, this is a picture I took off of FUH2, right, which is just thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of people flipping off H2s. You know? And knowing the backstory also becomes the essence of living well. Right? Like, think about local food. Think about foodies who want to tell you the farmer who grew the turnip that's a varietal, that's an heirloom, you know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's great. It makes for fabulous food, right? But it also makes for a better farming system, right? It's spreading into all sorts of things. There's Take Back Your Own Paper program in London where you actually literally get the paper you gave to somebody, that batch comes back to you as paper. And when you start to see beneath the surface, when you start to look for the backstory, we start to also recognize that it's not just energy, for example, that we can apply this to, but chemistry. And people are starting to want to know what's in my body. You know, what chemicals are in each of our bloodstreams right now, you know? And when people do the tests, the body burden tests, as they're called, the results are really frightening. Most of us have jet fuel and fire retardants and all sorts of other things coursing through our bloodstream right now. And obviously, none of us want those things, right? They're not helping us live a better life. And people are more and more interested in knowing what they're eating and drinking and breathing in. This is an EPA ad. You can order the contents of your local water system's water and the chemicals therein. I think that it's not going to be long before we start to see other kinds of products labeled. This is an imaginary ad, but you know, why shouldn't every piece of technology you buy tell you both the damage it's caused out there and the damage it might cause in here? Right? And once you start being worried about whether there's more than Intel inside your computer, you start to, you know, really value computers and so forth, computers and all sorts of products that are not going to, you know, harm you or the planet. And we're seeing already strides being made in that direction. And it's getting easier and easier to do this stuff. This is a really great Dutch product it's called the Equalizer. It's the Designwijzer. And I have no idea how to read any of this because I don't read Dutch, but basically it tells you things like, you know, a polyurethane, you know, it says here's how long it takes to break down, here's what it's used for, here are substitutes for it. You can just carry this around if you're, you know, like a contractor and figure out, you know, pull it out of your pocket and figure out exactly what kind of damage different choices are going to cause. And, you know, that's what's available right now. And it's going to get easier and easier. And I think that when you have a civilization that understands how to deliver the kind of lives we all want, right, using less energy and fewer materials in a non-toxic way, you really start to realize that a future that's profoundly better than the one we have now is perhaps on its way, if we want it, right? But it's also important to recognize that the folks sitting in this room are a minority of people on the planet. Folks sitting in this room, in terms of our socioeconomic status and so forth, are a minuscule minority of people on this planet. And that we need to think, you know, about answers that in fact will work for everyone. Right? Because if it doesn't work for everyone, it doesn't work. You know, we are now on a very tightly constrained planet, and if we're doing a great job while, you know, sub-Saharan Africa goes up in flames and China burns all its coal, we're not going to be, you know, tasting the fruits of our success, let's say. And so does this kind of innovation include people who are living in dramatically different situations? And it does. Here are monks carrying solar panels to their monastery. We're unleashing creative energies in people that we have traditionally regarded as best as aid recipients. And we're starting to recognize that these people are active players, not only in their own lives, but in a co-creation that we depend on. And some of these are really, high-tech solutions for low-tech homes or low-tech problems. This is a foot-powered generator called the Wiza. Another example is the one laptop per child machine, right? Or the genetically engineered landmine detecting flower, which helps people avoid getting killed by the hundreds of millions of landmines that are out there, or may soon at least. Some of them are more homegrown. There's the pot-and-pot refrigerator, which helps people keep their produce cool with a simple set of 2 pots and some sand and some water and evaporation. It's a really brilliant design. There are others which are old ideas, which are being now looked at with new technologies and new know-how. These are fog catchers. They distill water from humid air. Some of them are really simple, but utterly profound, like Plumpy Nut, which I really wished we would be able to have here and maybe share with folks. But it's a peanut butter-like product that kids who are suffering from severe malnutrition actually like. And so they're more likely to eat it when they're feeling demoralized and sick and weak than they will a formula. And this is now being spread all over the world. Simple idea, but Or the Life Straw, which we do actually have one here, and if you want to look at it after, we can take it out and see how it works. But essentially, it's a straw through which you can drink any water, and and when it hits your mouth, it will be pure and safe. And these can be deployed, obviously, in lots of different kinds of places. Some of them are just sheer genius. This remains, of all the things we've ever covered on World Changing, this is my favorite. This is a water pump that pumps the water as the kids play, and I think it's just brilliant, Some of them are really insightful. There are various pumps out there. The Super Moneymaker is the most well-known, which allow communities to grow more food. Just as we were hearing earlier, a solar water pump allows people to grow an extra crop. It increases the amount of food in the community. It also helps build businesses. It helps spread prosperity. There's actually one right here if you want to check it out. It's essentially like a Stairmaster. So, you can have more food and, I guess buns of steel, right? This is another brilliant thing, Solar Cone. We've got one over there we can show you. Distills water through evaporation and sunlight. Another brilliant technology. For thousands of years, just as we didn't know to put wheels on luggage, we carried water on our heads, and it turns out it's very easy to make something that rolls. And if we can address the fundamental problems that are holding back at least 1 billion people, and really when you talk about the problems that echo out from their lives, several billions of people, we start to realize that prosperity, at least stability, can become a platform forward, from which people spring forward, and that if we can in fact create a world where lots of people are thinking about the problems, where people are with free, inspired minds, widely connected, are all at work trying to get us through this narrow little piece of time towards a future that literally we can live with, I think anything is possible. The biggest barriers are not technological. The biggest barriers to building a sustainable planet are not technological. They're all political. Whether you're talking about ExxonMobil souring the climate debate, or people shooting protesters in some tyrannical country, those are political challenges. And fighting against those things is a fundamental bridge to building a future that's worth living in. And so, I think if I could leave us with one thing, it's that idea that, we need to be hopeful, but we also need to take this fight seriously, and we need to remind people who are on the other side, that there will be consequences. This is a quote from William Gibson, which I think is really important in an era and in an age where, obfuscation and, hidden priorities and conflicts of interest and so on and so forth have become absolutely routine. And it says just simply, it is becoming unprecedentedly difficult for anyone at all, to keep a secret. In the age of the leak and the bog of evidence extraction and link discovery, truths will either out or be outed later, if not sooner. This is something I would bring to the attention of every diplomat, politician, and corporate leader. The future eventually will find you out. The future will have its way with you. In the end, you will be seen to have done that which you did. And so I think it's really important that all of us decide which side we're on. And, you know, there are only two sides. There's keeping going the way we're going, which will destroy the planet, probably civilization, result in hundreds of millions of needless deaths. We know these things. These are utterly predictable. Or there's blazing a new path. And I think the choice is ultimately yours. So thank you very much.